Hello, I'm Don Mitchell. I'm glad to see you. Thanks for visiting me again to learn more about the 2000% solution, the book that teaches you how to accomplish 20 times more than you do now with the same or less time, effort, and resources. Today we'll be talking about chapter 12 of the book, Implement Beyond the Future Best Practice. Now, I know from experience in working with many students over the last 20 or so years in implementing 2000% solutions that some people seem to blow past the title to this chapter. They seem to think this chapter says, think about implementing past future best practices. No, this chapter talks about actually doing so. So just in case that you've missed that point, let me emphasize it again. What are you going to do today to begin creating a result that will be vastly beyond what anyone else will be doing in the next 5 years? Now, in doing this, I want to make some practical suggestions. First of all, I think you need to characterize what your organization's capabilities are. The chapter has some excellent ways to do that. So I want to add to those a few other dimensions. If, for instance, you are a cutting edge organization that has routinely developed much better ways to accomplish things than anyone else in your industry, then you probably have lots of capability to make powerful, impressive changes. Now, on the other hand, if you're a typical organization, you may not have made a powerful, important change other than to increase performance by 5, 10, or 15% in one small area at any time in the last 20 years. If that's the case, then implementing beyond the future best practice is going to be much more of a challenge. Conversely, you may be an organization that has trouble implementing even these simple kinds of changes. If that's the case, then you're going to have to take that into account. Now, obviously, there are a variety of ways, to do this. Whichever way you decide to do is totally up to you. But don't be reluctant to get outside help if you're one of those last two categories where big changes are a new issue to you, or in fact, you haven't really ever succeeded in making small changes. The reason I say that is I remember an experience I had as a graduate student. I did consulting to earn my way through graduate school for the graduate school that I attended. And in the course of doing this, I noticed that they had a horrible time making improvements. In fact, in one area that I worked for the school in, they had made no changes in the prior 32 years, absolutely zero changes. And the leaders organization just didn't want to make any changes at all. My job was to help them get through the process. Now, they needed two kinds of resources to do that. One is they needed me to help them think through whether it was worth making the changes, which changes, and how to do them. And second of all, they needed a second resource, which were people who could technically do the tricky parts and deliver to them a result that was easy for them to use. In fact, to do this, I felt that my background was insufficient to interact with the technical people. So I, in fact, brought on a technical resource to also work with me just for the purpose of communicating efficiently and effectively with the people who are going to do the technical work to be sure that it ended up being simple. So in this case, there were typically involved 8 or 9 outside people working on this implementation project for every one inside person. And yet we kept the two leaders of the organization quite involved so that we literally took no steps without getting their input and their suggestions and also dealing with their concerns, because we knew that because they had limited capability to deal with this change, we had to make this change feel as though it was no change. Okay, so keep that in mind, that even an organization like that can implement past the future best practice. In fact, I kept track of the implementation of that project for many years, and I was fascinated to discover that the same implementation approach, with no changes whatsoever, continued for the next 37 years. And during those 37 years, this organization continued to outperform and all of its competitors in what it accomplished in these changes. So it was well worth the incredible amount of effort that went into it. And I hate to think of what the lost tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars would have been had they not made that change. Okay, so one of the things that you should be thinking about as you consider implementing Beyond the Future best practice is, what is it this going to be worth if you're successful? Well, it's easy to imagine something bigger than what's going to happen. It's also easy to imagine something smaller than what's going to happen. So I encourage you to think realistically, perhaps within a range of from, how high it could be to how low it could be. And then as you think about the expense, discomfort, disruption, all the other issues, imagine how worth it is going to be. For example, I ran into an organization in the 1980s that was extremely profitable, extremely successful, and just felt like they had the world by the tail, as it were. They really owned that alligator of the difficult competitive environment, and they had done a lot of things really well. However, it was interesting when I dug back into the history, I discovered that the current management team came in as a result of the incredible chaos involved in the change that had led to this great success. So the transition had been painful, so painful that everyone had lost their jobs. Now, obviously, you don't want to have that happen to you and your organization. That shouldn't be the cost of making the change. So let me make some observations from my many years of experience of going out and identifying what the future best practice would be, and then how to implement past it. First of all, if you did a good investigation of the future best practice possibilities, you probably identified somewhere between 8 and 15 really remarkable opportunities. Now, if you're like most people, having found those opportunities, you want to, grab them all and bring them in and use them. Now, that's a wonderful feeling. However, chances are you can't do that in one grab. In other words, it's going to slip through your fingers if you try to grab too much. And the caution of this chapter is that you should try to probably grasp less than you think you can hold, because you're going to have inevitable difficulties, challenges you don't anticipate, and so forth. So let's say that any one of these possibilities would push you way past the future best practice. That may not be true, but we'll just assume for discussion purposes it is. Well, why don't you just pick the easiest one to do, the one that would occur fastest and give you a very high percentage of all the benefits? And then as you develop experience by doing that and the added resources that success will bring, then you can take on more of the future best practice. Now, I also know something that you don't know, because you haven't read that far into the book yet probably, which is that in the next 2 chapters, we're going to look for even bigger opportunities, opportunities that will make these exceeding future best practice possibilities look like little molehills rather than big mountains. So you don't want to tie up yourself too much in doing these things. In fact, the main benefit you're going to get from doing this implementation is going to be in 2 areas. First, the implementation benefit is going to come from your chance to really do something that's transformative, something probably your organization hasn't done before. Having had that experience, you'll then have confidence to do more of that, and hopefully desire to do that really as well, rather than sit there and rest on your laurels like that graduate school did for 37 years after they made the one big breakthrough. The second advantage is you're going to develop a much more realistic sense of how poor your performance is compared to what's possible. And that's going to inform the work you're going to do in the next two chapters. Now, if you picked up this book with the idea that you could read it, in a few days, maybe one chapter a day, get a couple of good ideas, put it down, and move on to the next book, you're very mistaken. You really don't understand what you have here. You have here the answers to creating vastly more than you would normally accomplish in 20 lifetimes. And that's just if you do one 2,000% solution. If in fact you do a series of 2,000% solutions in related areas, you could be creating the equivalent of what you would normally accomplish in 400, 8,000, 160,000, or even more lifetimes. So you could really throw away all those other books that you've read. You could not read another book after this, except perhaps the ones that make this process look really rather modest in what it can accomplish. With other books involved with the 2,000% solution and the 400-year project, such as Excellent Solutions. But and you would still be successful, and your organization would be successful beyond your wildest dreams. So you have to learn to concentrate, pay attention, and do the work. So this is the first chapter that has probably challenged you to see whether you're serious about making 2,000% solutions. And I take this time to discuss this because in the next two chapters, you're going to be even more challenged. So if you can't get past this challenge, don't go on to the next two chapters. However, realize that if you simply stop with implementing what is here in this chapter, you'll be doing something that will be remarkable all by itself. So if you forget the fact that this is just laying a foundation for even more astonishing results, you can rest proud if you just stopped at the end of this chapter. So don't skip over it lightly. Take it seriously. Do it. And take joy as you do it, realizing you're having the adventure of a lifetime. The kind of thing that if you studied business in high school, college, or graduate school, was the sort of reason that you dreamed of going into business, because you would be able to do something no one had done before. You'd be able to set a new standard, a standard that others would have to live up to, and people would be helped in vast numbers in ways that would be very gratifying for them and for you. So I encourage you to let that sink in deeply here, that this isn't just about you. This is about a large number of people, not only your customers, but it's also their customers. It's not only your employees, but your employees' families. It's not only your suppliers, but the people who supply your suppliers. It's not only the people who live in your vicinity and work around where you're located, it's also the people in the larger community who'll be impacted by this. In fact, if your example is powerful enough, you might become the equivalent of what I've seen happen in many cities around the world, where a single organization from a single change has become a model that has inspired people of all ages for generations to come to become powerful, positive innovators. So I wish you well as you take on that challenge. And you'll find in both the 2,000% solution and in the related workbook materials for this chapter everything you need to accomplish this first breakthrough that will be so significant in opening the door to a vast and better future for you and everyone else who's affected by this change. So I'll say goodbye for now. Thank you for listening, and I hope this has been a blessing to you. Take care.